Um, well, welcome everybody to Bud PR's first event of 2024 in our education and engagement series. I'm Alberto Medina, the president of Bud PR. I'm really excited to be here along some of my colleagues and friends, and really excited to have all of you join us for this event, Puerto Rico's pro-independence surge and the 2024 election. Bud PR is an organization of Puerto Ricans in the diaspora, primarily in the United States, who are fighting to educate, to organize, and to advocate for Puerto Rico's decolonization and independence. We are really excited to be able to bring a lot of these conversations about Puerto Rico to audiences beyond the island, especially here in the United States, where we know there's so much lack of information, so much education needed about Puerto Rico. And it's an incredibly exciting and important time to be talking about Puerto Rico because of all the challenges and because of all the changes happening on the island and because of this incredibly consequential election that's coming up this November. So without any further ado, I want to again thank everybody for joining us. And I want to introduce my colleague and friend Merari Fernandez of the Diaspora podcast, who will be our moderator for this evening. We're very excited to have these events alongside the Diaspora podcast. So take it away, Merari.
Hi, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to this presentation and those who will be listening through Diaspora, el podcast. This conversation will be recorded for an episode of Diaspora, the podcast that aims to give a political voice to the Puerto Rican diaspora. To stay connected with Diaspora, you can go to our website, diasporica.caprani.fm, follow us on social media on Twitter at @PR_Diasporica, or find us on Facebook. We're also on Stitcher, Amazon Music, Pandora, and Apple Podcast. So in today's episode, we want to talk about the increased interest among Puerto Ricans for the cause of independence, which might come to a shock to a lot of people out there who have in their minds that statehood is something that all Puerto Ricans love and, will be in favor of. So for us, it was very important to bring up the discussion so that we can start talking about what a lot of people are talking about on the streets and among ourselves, which is the cause of independence for Puerto Rico. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, always believing pro-independence Puerto Ricans were a minority, had no chance to win a general election, and also something few people will say out loud because of the social and economic repercussions of you saying out loud that you supported independence for Puerto Rico. Things are changing, and we thought this shift of the population towards seeing independence as an option should be discussed openly, as history is happening right in front of us. And for that reason, we invited Adrian Gonzalez. So welcome, Adrián, to Boricuas Unidos en la Diaspora and Diaspora, el podcast.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Thank you very much for the invitation of you, Diaspora, el podcast, and Bud PR. And I think it's very, not more than useful, but it is necessary to have this conversation because, as you said, we're seeing history, how it's changing just in front of our eyes. So I'm pretty sure that it will be a very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Adrian. For those who don't know who Adrian is currently running for election in Puerto Rico as a senator for San Juan 1st District, representing the Puerto Rico's Independence Party. He studied political science and later obtained a law degree, becoming an attorney in 2010. He worked toward defending the rights of disadvantaged populations, including special education students. He has worked as an advisor of Maria de Lourdes Santiago, the pro-independence party spokesperson in Puerto Rico's Senate. From that position, he has collaborated with countless entities and communities in defense of our education, the environment, and equity, and he has fought against displacement of Puerto Ricans and the right of Puerto Ricans to live in their own country. So who else could talk to us more about this topic than Adrian? So one of the first questions that I wanted to ask you, Adrian, is that before we talk about what's happening now in Puerto Rican politics and the debate over Puerto Rico's status, could you give us a short summary of how we got here and what has the political fight for independence historically looked like in Puerto Rico, to give us a context?
I'll try to be to do the long story short, but the independence movement in Puerto Rico began on the first third of the 20th century, and it is remarkable how similar are the conditions now as they were back then. We had an economic crisis. We had two major hurricanes that hit the island in a very short period of time, and how the United States abandoned the island in terms of relief after those major hurricanes and the Great Depression. And the sugar companies were owning most of the land in Puerto Rico, so there was a lot of displacement. So the environment by the late 20s was really pretty much the same as we're seeing now, but with different conditions. We don't have sugar companies now, but we do have Act 22, for example. So it's very similar. It's not San Felipe, the hurricane that hit the island on 1928, but we had Maria on 2017, and so on and so on. We can give like a whole bunch of things that were happening back then that are very similar to what is happening now. And it all started with this sense of being Puerto Rican and under those conditions, and that one thing led to the other in terms of how people needed to be represented politically in terms of we, the Puerto Ricans, because that was the second decade after the U.S. invasion. So it was like the transition between being a colony of one country to being the colony of other country, and how things didn't change. So we can say that there was a cooling period in terms of how people maybe was waiting for something different in terms of still being a colony, but now we're a colony of the United States, which is a new country, a modern country compared to Spain, etc. And that's how it started. As I said, this sense of being Puerto Rican, ser puertorriqueño, politically. So the first political movement that it was formed on the island, it was el Partido Nacionalista, founded by Pedro Albizu Campos, which at the beginning was a political party in all the sense of the word. They went to the elections. Then it became a more revolutionary political party in terms of not participating in the elections, but on the other hand, fighting for independence as a revolutionary force. And things were changing on the island, but the sense of feeling the urge of being independent was growing. Well, the PPD, Partido Popular, when it began, it was an independentista. They were independentistas as well. So that's it's a big flag of how Puerto Ricans were feeling during that time. The Partido Nacionalista, Partido Popular, then el Partido Popular abandoned independence, and on the mid-40s, the Puerto Rican Independence Party was founded. And for the first elections of the Puerto Rican Independence Party in 1948, we were the second movement on the island, the second most important party, with a lot of legislators elected. And, it was the second place. But after that, the gag law was passed. So it was a felony to be an independentista or to make any statement against the Puerto Rico government or the U.S. government. So for the 1952 elections, we still there at the second place, but then all began to, I don't like to use the word to crash down, but to slow down. And with the Cold War, the gag law, different things happening all over the world, the UN took Puerto Rico out of the list of non-self-governing territories in 1953 after the the Puerto Rican Constitution was approved in 1952 and the creation of the Estado Libre Asociado. So things on the island became more stable. So that urge of becoming independent slowed down by those different factors. I'm going very fast and being very
Definitely.
a very tight synthesis, but a lot of things were happening, and we were on this stage of the third force in the country with ups and downs. Then on the late 70s, we climbed again because of, again, all the things that were happening in the United States and all over the world. The civil rights movement, the anti-military strikes in the United States, Vietnam, the student movement in Puerto Rico were facing the military, the compulsory military service. And it created then again this sense of becoming something separate from the United States because our relationship with them, it's sending our children to war. And our students are forced to serve to the U.S. Army. And then Culebra, and the fight for the bombing in Culebra, and we won. So things on the 70s were different than in the 60s. And even when we were at Cold War, we climbed again. We won again this presence on the legislature with elected senators and representatives. And we can say that we stayed on that plateau during the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then it comes Vieques again. But pretty similar to what was happening on the 70s. It gave more energy to the independence movement on the island and to the PIP itself. Not anymore, we didn't have anymore the Partido Nacionalista as a political force as they were on the 50s, because, parenthesis, during the 50s, the Puerto Rican Independence Party was the second force in the electoral system, and at the same time, the revolutionary forces did a lot of things, like the Congress attack, the Blair House attack, and so there were so many independentistas on the island that they were the second force on the electoral system, and a very strong revolutionary movement, la Revolución del 50, también as well. It happened on the 50s. So
may I allow you, you allow me to ask you a question about that, which is like, what happened then if there were so many independentistas on the election and also on the on the island? What happened to the independence movement?
As I said, since the gag law was approved in 1948, and then it became a stronger law during the 50s, especially after the Revolución del 50 and the attacks on the Congress and the Blair House, the law enforcement here on the island was stronger against independentistas. So it's not longer profiling. They were arrested by doing nothing, just by being, if you were a relative of someone that was involved on la Revolución del 50, maybe you were arrested as well, even if you were non-independentista. So a lot of fear on the island of being independentista or just being related to independentistas as a family member or just being friends. People wasn't able to be hired on jobs or to become a law student in the UPR system because they were profiled as independentistas against the gag law. So that was, I think, from my point of view, the gag law was that big punch to the independentistas during the 50s. They survived to that during the 60s, a very strong repression. But as I said, during the 70s, even with the Cold War and with the gag law, which existed, and the profiling with the las carpetas, they climbed. We are really very resistant political movement. When you look back in history, it was a miracle that independentistas started to grow again during the 70s, even when from the last 20 years, they were facing a lot of repression and imprisonment, killings, and profiling. So that climb on the 70s that was very long-lasting, because we stayed pretty much the same during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And on the 2000, when Diegues and the struggle with the U.S. Navy, there was a big leap again in terms of the political scenario and the electoral scenario for the Puerto Rican Independence Party. Then we had on 2001, the 9/11 in the United States. So the sense of patriotism here in Puerto Rico slowed down a little bit. Things were different in the island in terms of how politics were seen after 9/11. A PPD candidate on 2004 won the election. That was the first time that the Puerto Rican Independence Party didn't reach the 3% that is required by law to be a political party in terms of how the legal system works here. So, but since 1968, we were reaching the 3% and even higher than that. And then 2004, 8, 12, and 16, we didn't reach the 3% by different factors in terms of the artificial economy here on the island. But what happened after that? Or
When you
that?
when you say 3%, for the people who don't know, you mean like 3% in the election?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. 3% of the ballots. And different factors were against, the candidates of the Puerto Rican Independence Party for governor, because on the other hand, we still have a senator and a representative on the House, except on 2008. But parallel to that timeline, the economic crisis was starting to rise on the island since 2006. And I think that at this point, at least, no, not at this point. I think after 2012, when we did hit the bottom of the economic crisis, the country itself started to see politics differently, and things were changing, but very slowly. And for the elections on 2016, now when you look back, people like Alexandra Lugaro, that was an independent candidate, started to change the way that politics were behaving on the island. It was a woman, it was an independent candidate. She received a lot of votes on the election, and people started to lose the tradition of voting the same way. So that was a very important thing that happened on the 2016 election. Then on 2016, we had Promesa and we had Pueblo versus Sánchez Valle. Many things were happening at the same time. A different election, Promesa was approved. People was hesitating if Promesa was a good or a bad thing. We were clear that it was going to be a bad thing, but people didn't believe us. Well, that's the way it is. And then it was proved that Promesa was a very bad thing, and the oversight board, La Junta, it's a very bad thing. But we all know that
why do you
now.
Why do you think Promesa was bad for Puerto Rico? For those who don't know what Promesa is.
Yeah, Promesa, it's a law that was approved on the U.S. Congress for an oversight of how Puerto Rico will pay the public debt. And in order to be able to pay that debt, Promesa has this thing, which is the oversight board, which is it is 7 people who are appointed by the U.S. president, no approval of the Senate, no elections here in Puerto Rico to choose those 7 people. And that 7 people, their only job is to ensure that we are paying our debt no matter what. When I say no matter what, if paying the debt means to make the UPR more expensive, well, that's the way it is. If paying the debt means more taxes, more taxes we will have. If paying the debt means closing public schools, well, you have to close public schools. And why I say you have to? Because PROMESA have a very specific language that if any elected official here in the island, the governor, a city mayor, a senator, or a representative, acts against the recommendations of the board or PROMESA, they will be incarcerated. So that it's not a democratic language, because it's not a democratic body. It's La Junta, it's the board. They are administrating our money, our public money. And that was a very big shock for many people when they learned how La Junta was working and how PROMESA was working towards the island. Then Pueblo versus Sánchez Valle was a big hit to those people who thought that the Estado Libre Asociado was a democratic solution back then in the 50s for taking Puerto Rico out of being a colony. And Pueblo versus Sánchez Valle said that the creation of the Estado Libre Asociado and the Constitution and the elected government didn't change at all the political relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. So Pueblo versus Sánchez Valle on 2016 marked a very important, part of our modern history in terms of an eye-opening experience for many generations that thought that in fact the Estado Libre Asociado was the good thing, and that we were this example of democracy for the rest of Latin America. And no, we are the same colony as we were back in 1898 and in 1917 and in 1946 and on 2024. And
so I know that I know that you started to talk about what's happening in current times, which is where we're going to go towards. But I wanted you to talk about what you just talked about in terms of the past of the pro-independence movement, because I think there is a misconception here in the United States in terms of like, okay, so pro-independence people are just a minority, they're just at 3%, but they don't understand the reason why people might be biased in favor of statehood. So I think it's very important for us to understand that context, and then to understanding what happened into 2020, which is where I know that you were going towards. And so, that since the 2020 election, in which the Pro-Independence Party obtained 14% of the vote in the general election, which is a historic vote. For some people here in the States will say, oh, 14%, that's nothing. But, you've been talking about the 3% like quite a lot, because that was the percentage that the Pro-Independence Party will get in the election. So, but that changed in 2020. And so it is often argued, like in the media, that because of that, there is an increased support for independence in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
While gubernatorial elections do not decide the relationship that Puerto Rico garners to the U.S., do you think there is some truth to the idea that independence for Puerto Rico is on the rise? And why would you think so?
It is on the rise, and I was going to that very specific topic just after 2016, because on 2017 we had Hurricane Maria, and as I said, on the late 20s, and I will answer the last question at the same time. People felt very safe under the protection of the United States in terms of different ways, and one of those factors that made the people being safe under the protection of the United States was in the case of a natural disaster. And then Maria came. People thought that even when we had a natural disaster like Maria, the next day the United States will be here helping on the relief, bringing water, bringing food, bringing all kinds of things, even money cash. And it wasn't like that. After Maria, a lot of people died because of the local government and the federal government that weren't doing their part in the relief after Maria. We as a country felt very alone. And on the other hand, the ties between the diaspora and the Puerto Ricans here on the island made stronger, because only the Puerto Ricans that were living on outside of Puerto Rico felt our pain here on the island. And a lot of help was sent to the island by our fellow Puerto Ricans, but not by the US government.
Exactly.
So those things happened at the same time after Hurricane Maria. People felt unsafe and abandoned by the US and the local government, which in fact was a pro-statehood government. And people felt more cared by the people who lived in the United States, because even people that didn't have relatives living outside of the island received help from other people which was outside of the island, because they were feeling our pain in the United States. And those things were very important to the way of our social behavior was starting to change after Hurricane Maria. I don't know if you outside of Puerto Rico saw this, but when we were at our worst part after Maria, no electricity, no water in many places, everything was destroyed, nothing was getting here. Those first 10 days were terrible. People took out the Puerto Rican flag. You saw Puerto Rican flags outside of houses that were teared apart by the wind. You saw Puerto Rican flags on cars. You saw Puerto Rican flags on the trucks that were bringing some help. And that's a very powerful message. We have
What do you
ourselves.
think what do you think it means?
I think that it meant that we have ourselves. This is the only thing we have right now, ourselves. Puerto Rico, us, Puerto Ricans, helping each other. I am helping my neighbor because he has water, but not enough food. I have enough, I have food, I have plenty of food, so we can share. He can give me water and I can give him food, and so on. So I can care for his children or her children by the time that she is going to the supermarket to make a 2-hour line for buying the few things that they have there. Because when we say we didn't have food, it's that even when supermarkets open, nothing was there to buy. You can have $1 million cash, but you couldn't buy anything because there was nothing to buy. So the shock with Hurricane Maria made people to think different about so many things. The way we treated other people, the way we saw ourselves as Puerto Rican, as a community, the way we started to see the diaspora, and the way we saw the government. We started to see, and when I say we, no independentistas or the VIP, we, the people of Puerto Rico, as a general. We started to see the government differently and with more obligations, because that sense of abandonment was very strong. And when we saw in 2019 that famous chat that caused the resignment of Ricardo Rosselló, people didn't care a lot in terms of the homophobic, chauvinistic, classist comments. The indignation here was with the jokes about the hurricane and the deaths after the hurricane. That was very offensive, because 4,000 people died because of the hurricane and because of the lack of help from the government. And that same government was joking about it on a private chat. So that's why people went out to the streets. We were holding that sense of frustration with the government since the hurricane of 2016, and I think it all came out on 2019 with the chat, and that's why we asked the resignment of Ricardo Rosselló, which was a year before the elections. So we have all of those things that were happening at the same time that changed the way the elections were, behaving from the last 100 years. That's why the Puerto Rican Independence Party climbed from 2% to 14%. And in terms of the independence and how people saw independence, well, the first thing that we have to remark is that Juan Dalmau is an independentista. So the fact that he climbed from 2% to 14%, it means that a lot of people is not afraid of having an independentista as a governor. That is a very powerful message in terms of how people it's seeing independentistas. They're not dangerous anymore. They're not a threat to the island anymore. So 14% was willing to vote for an independentista. And on the other hand, when that bubble was, popped after the hurricane in terms of how safe we felt before and then after Maria and before and after La Junta, which is responsible for many things that are happening, very bad things that are happening on the island, people is starting to see how unfair is the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. And if La Junta is responsible for those many bad things and for the fact that every year 50,000 people is moving out from the island, and then the corruption, etc., it's the perfect storm for people to look for different things in a political way. Different things it means in terms of the status. Well, maybe independence is not that bad at all, because as an ELA, we had a hurricane and we were abandoned by the United States. As an ELA, we have La Junta, which is very bad. It's making things a lot more expensive in terms of public education, etc. And with so many people moving out from the island because of the ELA, it's not giving the opportunities in terms of housing and employment, etc. And then moving to the statehood and seeing how hard it is to live in the statehood, that it's a different group of people that they know what ELA is, they know how statehood works, and they actually think that maybe the independence it's the thing that we need. So in terms of
I just want to, sorry for interrupting, but I
No,
just wanted to mention the thing that you said about like how Puerto Ricans raise the flag and how you saw that like increasingly after Hurricane Maria. Like I think you were talking about how it changed a lot of things in how Puerto Ricans perceive a lot of things in terms of their reality. I'm thinking it changed the way they conceived Puerto Rico as a nation, as a country in and on itself. And as you said, like if we had ourselves and the United States just kind of like, they abandoned the Puerto Rican people, like why do they need, do we need them? I remember one time, just to bring an anecdote, I was taking an Uber, and so this person, she was very liberal, very progressive, and we were talking about politics. And one of the things that we were going to talk about statehood for Puerto Rico, assuming that I would support statehood for Puerto Rico. And I said, no, I don't. And a lot of progressive people in Puerto Rico would not support statehood for Puerto Rico. So she was surprised, and she was like, why? And I said, well, do you see Hurricane Maria? We felt like if you're not going to help, get out of here, leave us alone. We can do it ourselves. So, and I think everything that you've said is very important because, because of the misconception that that a lot of people have here in the US in terms of independence for Puerto Rico. But also, I think one of the questions that one of the participants was asking is like the role that la ley de cabotaje, I forgot how to say that in English. Like
Cabotage Law.
People realized the impact that was having in the economy through Hurricane Maria, which is part of what makes unfair our relationship to Puerto Rico. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, and that was the first strike, I think, when they were saying on the news that because of the Cabotage Law, the San Juan Harbor was shut down and no ship was allowed to enter on the San Juan Harbor with anything, not even fuel. The thing of the fuel was a very bad thing, because fuel wasn't just necessary for cars to travel all around the island. Fuel was necessary for generators. Hospitals were running out of fuel for running. That's how many people died as well. And people saw that, maybe my grandmother died because there was no fuel, because the U.S. government and their laws didn't allow fuel ships to dock on the San Juan Harbor. And we had to process many information in a very short period of time. We knew this, but when you're seeing it in the middle of the crisis, the only news for 2 days were when we will have fuel, when we will have food, when we will have water. And the U.S. president had to sign a waiver of the Cabotage Law for allowing different ships to dock on the U.S. harbor. It took 10 days to open the San Juan Harbor for starting to receive some help and food and supplies and whatever. The airport was shut down for 3 weeks. It was more and we were able to receive supplies by water first, and we were able to receive supplies from air, unless it was a military airplane or whatever. But the thing with the Cabotage Law was invisible before that, because people knew that we were buying things 20% more expensive than other places of the States. But unless you were going there and buying it 20% cheaper, you didn't notice. You just know that that's the price here in the island. When you saw it on the emergency, the middle of the crisis, it's a different way of seeing the Cabotage Law. So it was a very remarkable thing in terms of the different things that make people look different, the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico.
I just talk about this. It made me think that maybe Democrats will say, well, but that was under Donald Trump. So if we were under a Democrat, things would have been different. Do you think so? Do you think things would have been different?
Yeah. Promesa was approved under a Democrat government. Barack Obama signed Promesa. Barack Obama appointed the first board. La primera junta was appointed by Barack Obama. So as I say in Espanol, in Spanish, choosing between Democrats and Republicans here in the island is trying to choose between los malos and los peores, the bad and the worst. That's the difference between Democrats and Republicans in terms of Puerto Rico. I'm not saying that it's the same on the United States, because in fact, for a person that lives in the States, there is a big difference between a Democrat and a Republican. But from the colony, the difference is very slight. There's still a difference, because Donald Trump threw paper towels.
Yeah, maybe a Democrat might not throw paper towels, but they will do other things. They will be more politically correct, but they will sign laws that will not be helpful. They
will say good morning, but even when after saying good morning, they will stop you. The other one will come with a knife, and that's it.
Yeah, so,
you said something very important in terms of how people in the United States, not the diaspora, but Americans in general, they see statehood as a solution for our problem, the more fair solution. They see it in terms of this is a civil rights issue, but that's part of colonialism as well. they don't think that we're good enough to survive by ourselves, to be self-governed. That the only acceptable solution is becoming a state, because that's the white man's burden. That they need to do that in terms of helping the island, because they're not good enough to be self-governed, and that's a very colonial way of thinking as well. And that's we were fighting that speech from, especially after Maria. We are fighting that speech in the United States, because it's not like that. It is not a civil rights issue. Statehood, it will make things different in the island in terms of, economic growth, etc.
So, like we talk about the Democrats, but let's talk a little bit about Republicans, because they recently removed support for statehood for Puerto Rico from their platform. Do you think this change is important? And in what ways is this reflective of those political changes in Puerto Rico?
Well, it is very important, because the statehood was on the Republican platform for decades. I think it was there for more than 60 years. And for the first time, they erased the statehood as a commitment with the Puerto Ricans. And that's very, that it is a powerful message for Puerto Ricans and for the pro-statehood people here in Puerto Rico, because when you have a candidate for governor which is Republican, and that she's using
the Puerto Rican governor.
Huh?
The Puerto Rican governor, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Jennifer Gonzalez, she's a Republican. And when you have a candidate for the PNP that she's Republican, that statehood, it's part of her, her offers as a candidate for her people that goes for statehood. Many people that thought that statehood was possible are starting to think that, well, maybe this is not possible at all. And that's a big bunch of people here on the island, because we are on the, we are canvassing, we are talking to a lot of people, and we are receiving that more often, especially after the Republicans took out the statehood out of their platform. And the allies there.
I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions from the audience who is here. And one of the questions is, what do you believe should be the current priority of the diaspora in organizing in the U.S. in favor of independence?
I think that diaspora have a very special quest in terms of fighting that speech on some progressive groups on the United States, that statehood will be the solution, and the thing that they like to to use the as I said, the civil rights issue of these U.S. citizens, that they're not able to vote for the president. They're U.S. citizens, but they're not the same as us. They need to be the same. No, we're not U.S. citizens that are fighting for more justice as U.S. citizens. We are a Latin American nation in the Caribbean, which is fighting for its own sovereignty. We're not just U.S. citizens that are fighting for voting for the president and to have the same rights as the people who is living on the different 50 states. We want to be as free as the people who is living on the other countries of the world. There is a very different thing, and people very good intentioned, good intentions are behind the speech of the U.S. citizens of Puerto Rico that are not having the respect they deserve, etc. Well, it's not a matter of that. That's the pro-statehood propaganda, So they have to be very careful, those progressive groups in the United States, using that message. And the diaspora, I think they should make a difference educating those progressive groups. Well, Puerto Rico is not just a territory populated by U.S. citizens. Puerto Rico was a country even before the Mayflower landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts by the 1600s. We forget that. When the Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts in the 1600s, Puerto Rico was a 200-year colony of Spain, but with its own identity by that time. So our history is even older than the U.S. history. So we were a country before them. And that makes Puerto Rico, one of the things that makes Puerto Rico a different country from the United States, it's that long history, our own identity. We are more, we have more things in common with our neighbors here in Central and South America than the things that we have in common with Americans. That's why we're different, and that's why we can be a state. That's why we won't be able to be a state, because they are not, they won't accept the admission of a state, which is a Latin American country. And that's a very important message that the Puerto Ricans that are living in the United States have to bring to these progressive groups and even the progressive sectors in the Democrat Party. So they can see Puerto Rico differently more often.
There is a comment here on the chat. Part of the reason that the ProIndependence Party has rightly gotten so much support in recent years is disdain with the current two political parties, duopoly, which has led to institutional rot and a rampant corruption at all levels of government. The federal government has had to step in to arrest corrupt elected officials, but that obviously won't be a solution when Puerto Rico is independent. What do you feel are some major points needed to strengthen Puerto Rico's institutions to restore some of that confidence people had in them before?
It's a long question.
Yeah.
More slowly, please. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
The question, what do you feel are some major points needed to strengthen Puerto Rico's institutions in terms of corruption to restore some of that confidence people had in them before?
Well, in terms of the Puerto Rican Independence Party, we never have had a political, a politician, not even accused or impeached or imprisoned of corruption. I think the Puerto Rican Independence Party will celebrate 78 years since its foundation on this October. We have had city councilors, we have had senators, representatives, we have administered public funding for political campaigns, election after election after election. So that means millions of dollars of public money that we have administered. Some people say here in the island that we don't have people in prison for corruption because we haven't won the election yet. That is false, because even when we never had a governor, one will be the first one. When we never have we never had a governor, that doesn't mean that other public officials that are members of the Puerto Rican Independence Party and that are representing the Puerto Rican Independence Party are different from other people that indeed were in prison. For example, maybe you saw Tata Charbonnier. She was in prison this year because of kickback. Well, she was a representative at the same time as Dennis Marquez, which is the representative of the Puerto Rican Independence Party. He didn't do the things that she did. So that's why she's in jail and he's not. Maria de Lourdes Santiago has been a senator for the last 2 decades. And different senators from the PNP and the PPD have been imprisoned for corruption during that period of time. And she's not. So she's different from those people, as well as many others. But my point here is that we have proved to the people of Puerto Rico that we can be we can have a clean government. We can be free of corruption, because we have been free of corruption since our foundation on 1946. Our political campaigns are audited every year, and we have never had a single no irregularities in our political campaigns, with private money or with public money. So I think people knows the difference, and they are that confidence that we have to keep building. It has been built during the years. They're seeing us as an option in terms of clean government because of that clean record that we have.
So I have two more questions. One is a question that I wanted to ask about, the general election, and then there is a follow-up question. But I think that we need to talk about the election happening this year. For those of us, or those people who don't know what's going on in Puerto Rico. So could you talk to us a little bit about the upcoming election, about, what's going to happen in 2024 in terms of like November and the general election, but also with the Alianza. What is the Alianza, and how did it came about?
Well, as you said on the beginning, we are seeing history changing in front of our eyes, and in fact, we changed the way that politics are carried, in the island. The way politics are behaving on the island, we changed that already with the Alianza, and that is in response to the 2020 results of the election, in terms of Alexandra Lugaro for Victoria Ciudadana had 14%, Juan Dalmau for the Puerto Rican Independence Party at 14%. That means they together was 28% of the country voting for something different from the PNP and the PPD. In addition to that, the winner of the election, Pedro Pierluisi, had barely 32%. So if the fusion of the votes of Alexandra Lugaro and Juan Dalmau, from representing both parties, are very close to the winning number in terms of numbers, So that's the way the conversation of La Alianza started. How close we will be if we go together for the 2024 election. We tried to change the law in terms of allowing real alliances in terms of on a ballot, that a candidate could run under the insignia. You just escaped from my mind the name in English. Insignia of two different parties, but the legislator didn't change the law. Then we challenged the law in terms of at the court. We lost the case. So La Alianza, it's making its way with our current legal system, in terms that we're not breaking the law, but we found the way to, under this unfair law, to make La Alianza. That's why we have a candidate for governor, but we don't have a candidate for resident commissioner. Victoria Ciudadana, they don't have a candidate for governor, but they do have a candidate for resident commissioner, and we're voting for the candidate of the Puerto Rican Independence Party for governor and the candidate of resident commissioner of Victoria Ciudadana. That marks the cornerstone of La Alianza. As the same way in San Juan, the Puerto Rican Independence Party didn't put a candidate for city mayor, because we are supporting Manuel Natal, who had a remarkable result on the 2020 election. He was second place, but he was very close to win the election. Actually, the day of the election, he won the election. Then when they counted the votes that were ay Dios mío, el voto adelantado,
The
the people who
absentee?
voted by mail and on their houses, that made the difference. And Miguel Romero took the first place. And that's the way La Alianza is working. We are supporting candidates from both parties, but we're acting as a force, with one voice in terms of the campaign. We are showing the people that La Alianza is the option to defeat el PNP and el PPD. And I think the message it's getting there. I think it's working. Juan Dalmau, it's on second place according to 2 different polls out of 3. A very important
very
polls.
historic.
That's historic. That's itself. It's historic. So we are on our last. It's 80 days from the election, but I think the message is getting. It's getting there. When you go outside and you talk to people, you can catch that sense of hope that people is having on La Alianza, because this is a country that we have so many bad news every day for everything. And Alianza, it's like the good news on the political scenario. PPD and PNP, they are fighting even between them, amongst them. And La Alianza is these people that they were competing on the last election, and now they are together. They're sitting on the same table. They're exchanging candidates. And it's a good news. People needed good news here on the island. So I think that's part of the whole mystic of La Alianza. And, as I said, good candidates with a clean record, and the chance of winning, it's real, and people are seeing that.
And maybe it's good news for a lot of people, but bad news for the traditional parties that have been in power. And that's why they have been attacking La Alianza so much nonstop all these days. But there is another question that I want to ask you from the audience. It says, what major obstacles would the Partido Independentista or the ProIndependence Party will have to overcome if we win the general election?
We'll have different obstacles. I think it will depend on how the Senate and the House of Representatives are, how will be the composition of the Senate and the House. That's why we're making a strong campaign in terms of our candidacies for Senate and the House of Representatives, because one need to have a legislator. If he governs and the majority in Senate and in the Cámara are from the PNP, it will be a very, it will be very challenging governing for the next 4 years with not having the support, having a war against you from the Senate and the House of Representatives, because that will be a declaration of war. If one wins and he doesn't have enough votes to implement its own policies, it's very challenging. I think that's the biggest challenge that we'll have, because one has the chance, some of us have the chance, but we need many votes, 14 in the Senate and 26 in the House of Representatives. So it's a challenge, but it's 5 parties. That's different as well. I don't think there will be a party with 14 votes on the Senate or 26 on the House, as it is right now. on the Senate, the biggest group is the PPD with 12 senators. No one reached 14. And the PPD in the House, they have 25. They didn't reach 26 either. So things will be very interesting on November 6th, that morning, the next day of the elections.
Definitely. And do you see a possible, I mean, we don't know who's going to win the Senate and the House of Representatives and how the composition will be, but that will require some negotiation between, among political parties. So the Pro-Independence Party will have to get into that negotiation.
And we've been negotiating by all these 4 years because, as I said, especially on the Senate, that 12, it's not enough to pass any law. And the governor has its delegation, which are 9. So the governor needs votes from the PPD, from the PIP, from Victoria Ciudadana, from the independent senator. So politics changed in so many ways after 2020. That's why we have 11 laws passed during this term. The Puerto Rican Independence Party legislators always are the most, they have the biggest number of legislation presented, but not passed. I remember the first term that I worked with Maria de Lourdes, we only have 1 law passed. But on this term, we had 11 because on the checks and balances, you even have to do that to pass some laws of the minority and to sign them because they need our vote for other things as well. So that is the real politics. That's the way it should be, with negotiation, not the hegemonic, party. Go with the flow.
And so there's an important question that I missed. I'm sorry about that. Which says, what would you say to all those people who say if Puerto Rico becomes independent, it would be like Cuba and Venezuela?
Those are I think that's part of the old sayings of the Cold War, but we have the internet now. We have access to so many information that, mira, the picture of Maria Lourdes and Rubén with Maduro, it's from 2013. That's how old is that picture. Maria Lourdes was elected as a senator after that photo with flying colors. Juan Dalmau was elected as a senator with flying colors after that photo. So I think no one believes that we actually think that we want to become as Cuba or Venezuela. We want to have the good things of Cuba, the good things of Venezuela, the good things of Spain, the good things of France, but we don't want to become neither Cuban or Venezuela, neither Spain or France. We want to be Puerto Rico as a self-governing country with its own laws and wealth, and that we have full rights to rule on our land. That's the only thing we want. We don't want to be as anyone. And definitely the comparison with poor countries is just to make the statement that independence is the same as being poor, but that's a myth that it's broken, more often. People think that if we become a state, we will be the poorest state of the 51 states if we become a state.
So there is a question, and I think with this question we're gonna close our webinar podcast, but I think it's an important question, and it says, how can Boricuas en la Diaspora help the independence movement financially? The person said, I never hear about people receiving emails requesting donations to support the Independence Party or La Alianza so it can run political ads on the Puerto Rican TV stations. What would you have to say about that?
Well, financially, there are so many ways that the diaspora can support the Independence Party in terms of you can look in on the internet in patrianuevapr.com the different ways to support Juan Dalmau, but you can support the Puerto Rican Independence Party that has a separate account by ATH Móvil. If you have ATH Móvil, you can support by PayPal. I'm not sure the username for PayPal for the Puerto Rican Independence Party, but I think it's just PIP. If you look on it on PayPal, you can send checks to our address, and there is a top of $3,000 per person as a contribution in 1 year, but it's more than 3,000. It's $3,100. But that top, it's for the party and for each candidate. So if someone is able to give $3,100 to the party, it can give $300 and $1,000 to Juan and to Maria Lourdes and to Dennis and to any candidate. So,
Okay.
and we have had fundraisers at different cities in the United States, and people donate, and we have their information. It's completely legal as long as you have the information of the donante, the contributor, and you stay under the top of $3,100.
So they go to your website, the Pro-Independence Party. What's the website?
patrianuevapr.com.
And they go there, and if they want to sign up for emails and reminders about donations and anything that's going on,
to do anything as you wish, to sign up for the newsletter, to make donations. It's a very friendly web page that you can find whatever you want to receive information, to give money, or whatever.
So I want to thank you for being here and answering all our questions, Adrian. Thank you very much. I think that we really needed this information in English, which is not very abundant, about the pro-independence movement. I also want to thank the Boricuas Unidos en la Diáspora. If you want to support Boricuas Unidos, some of the things that we talk about here about the pro-independence cause, that's what Boricuas Unidos en la Diáspora support. There are different ways in which Boricuas Unidos might need help from you outside of the traditional political party lines. So you can go to budpr.org. Is that correct, Alberto? You can put the link on the chat. And BudPR always welcomes donation too, so that we can continue doing our work. Alberto, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I just want to close for a few seconds by thanking both of you again, Merari, Adrian, and to thank all of you for being here, and to say stay tuned to our emails and to our social media. We've got some other virtual events coming up that we would love to see you at. We're going to continue exploring these topics, colonialism, Puerto Rico's sovereignty. It's an election season, so there's a lot of interesting political things happening, as our guest Adrian told us. But we also know that this is a fight that's going to continue beyond November, and that all of us in the diaspora, as Adrian said, as many people in the chat alluded to, have a role to play. Sometimes we put things out there and people say, oh, this all has to happen in Puerto Rico. This all has to come from Puerto Rico. And of course, Puerto Ricans on the island need to lead. But those of us who are here in the diaspora in the United States, we have a role, we have a power, as voters, as constituents, as people who can have those conversations with progressive allies and organizations. And even those of us, those who aren't progressive, who need to learn more about this topic and to get involved. So thank you again. We hope to see you soon. Thanks again to Merari, our moderator, and to Adrian. And onward and upward for the cause of our nation's liberation.
Thank you very much. And my English was very rusty, but I did my best.
It was great. It was great.
Don't worry.
All right. Have a good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much.
Adios.